Hello and welcome to the first, I think, or concurrently one of the first talks of the series this week, which celebrate the opening of the National Museum of Qatar on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. This talk is focused upon public art and heritage. My name is Tom Eccles. I'm the director of the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard College in the United States, the Hess Museum of Art. I'm a curator at the Park Avenue Armory. Very fortunately, public art advisor to Qatar Museums. Great honor to welcome you here tonight. And please welcome tonight's panelists, al-Rahman, al-Sahaq, Liam Gillick, Jean-Michel Othoniel, and my silent partner, Suzanne Gupta, who will join us shortly. al-Rahman is head of public art and a colleague. I'm pleased to have worked with most closely at Qatar Museums on a program of installations and interventions throughout Doha and the country. An architect and an urbanist by profession, al-Rahman worked as master planning manager and was the custodian of an array of high-profile projects of multiple scales, ranging from master planning to street furniture. In his current role, al-Rahman is responsible for creating and managing partnerships with public and private sectors, fostering relationships with local and international artists, and overlooking Qatar Museum's public art collection, its growth and its conservation. Liam Gillick. Liam Gillick's Folded, Extracted, Personified is a large-scale interactive work installed throughout MIA Park, consisting of multiple unique head and whole panels. Commissioned for the inauguration of the National Museum of Qatar, the work draws inspiration from the collections of Doha's newest museum and that of the celebrated Museum of Islamic Art. Each panel features a unique work from the museum's collections, with visitors invited to place their heads within the context of each historic depiction. The actual museum object depicted and its location can be found by scanning the barcode on the lower corner of each sculpture. So the work that Liam has been commissioned to make relates back to both a public installation of contemporary artwork, but also draws inspiration and draws direct reference with the collections within the museum. It's part minimal sculpture, looks rather like a solid perhaps, or from a distance looks like a minimal sculpture, but it's also part playground attraction, and this duplicity playfully responds to MIA Park as a place for social gatherings, weekend bazaars, and leisure activities. Liam is a New York-based artist born in the United Kingdom, whose diverse practices encompass sculpture, installation, public projects, and texts. Jean-Michel Othoniel's enchanting aesthetics revolves around the notion of emotional geometry, using the repetition of modular elements such as bricks or his signature beads, which are his most recurring motif. He creates exquisite jewelry-like sculptures whose relationship to human scale ranges from intimacy to monumentality. His predilection for materials with reversible and often reflective properties, particularly blown glass, that has been the hallmark of his practice since the early 1990s, relates to the deeply equivocal nature of his work. Monumental yet delicate, baroque yet minimal, poetic yet political, his contemplative forms, like oxymorons, have the power to reconcile opposites. While his dedication to site-specific commissions for public spaces has led some of his work to take an almost architectural turn. This is certainly true of his extraordinary new work, Alpha, a series of lyrical, calligraphic foundations that dance along the waterfront in front of the Jean Nouvel National Museum. Shuda, who will join us shortly, is a member of Rax Media Collective, alongside Monica Nerula and Jibish Bachi. Rax, which is from India, follows its self-declared imperative of kinetic contemplation to produce a trajectory that is restless in its forms and methods, yet concise with the procedures that it interprets or invents. The collective trio make contemporary art, edit books, curate exhibitions, and stage situations. It has collaborated with architects, computer programmers, writers, curators, and theatre directors, and have made films. It has also co-founded Sarai, the interdisciplinary and incubatory space at the Center for Study of Developing Societies in Delhi in 2001, where it initiated processes that have left a deep impact on contemporary culture in India. Most importantly, their work is the focus of a monographic exhibition at Mataff, Still More World, that opened last week. Each of our panelists has responded in quite different ways to the cultural landscape of Qatar. And for this, we have brought them together tonight to discuss public art and heritage. Each will make a short presentation of their work, followed by a roundtable discussion. So I thought probably who's better to put all of this in context than al-Rahman. Then we'll move to Jean-Michel, and then to Liam, and finally to Shuda, and then we'll open it up for a roundtable discussion. Yeah. al-Rahman.
Thank you, Tom, for this introduction. I don't have a presentation, so I don't have pictures. I'm sure the colleagues will have enough, more than enough to show. Happy to be here, and thank you all for coming. It's a real privilege to be in a panel with such artists on an international scale. And we're very excited regarding the opening of the National Museum of Qatar, which will be open to the public on the 28th of, on Wednesday, the 28th. I encourage everyone who's visiting to check out the public artworks there, because it relates to our topic, which is cultural heritage. They are good examples. Public art can bring context and ideas to our awareness without our permission. If we consider art as a communication medium, then public art may be one of the best or most effective languages. Public art is different from other types of gallery or museum art because it doesn't wait for us to visit the gallery. It breaks out of the walls of a cultural institute and encounters us in the public domain. So we see it on our way to work or our way to school. And public art is also considered one of the faces of a nation. It reflects the nation's ideals. It reflects its economical strength, of course, its culture. By placing cultural heritage in the narrative or at the center of the narrative of an artwork, we can preserve these ideals for future generation and communicate them to an international audience. Through displaying various forms of art in public space, we aim to inspire local talent and establish organic growth of the art scene in the local community. Qatar Museums work towards conserving our heritage by localizing the global and localizing the local. It's a tongue twister. This allows for cultural dialogue between nations. We are proud of our past and looking forward to our future. Having prominent artists and curators, such as our colleagues here, is a way to bring home an international language. And I use language here metaphorically. It's not about importing only, it's also about exporting. So having local artists, curators, and art specialists interact and work with international artists and curators allow local artists and the public to learn that language, which leads to local art, to the rapid development of the local art scene. Through cultural exchange programs such as the Year of Culture, our local artists export our cultural heritage to the world through the international language, this international language and medium. It is important to mention that our contemporary culture will become part of our heritage in the future. This includes things that are out of context, maybe currently, such as the lamb bear or the Untitled artwork by Urs Fischer at the airport, to Today, the public have accepted that, and we consider it part of our culture. It signifies different things from, I guess, the artistic intent. Today, it's a symbol of the lifestyle, of traveling, and many things. Another example is, of course, the Everything is Gonna Be All Right by Martyr Creed. It commemorates the anniversary of the blockade on Qatar. So the context have changed, especially for the people of Qatar and the local residents. Another important aspect of public art is that it needs to be accepted by the people. And for that, we have a role to play in educating people, because not everyone have gone to art school, and not everyone in the public studied conceptual or abstract art. And perhaps today we will see how our artists have tackled their artwork and cultural heritage. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm really happy to show you this amazing project we are working on since 5 years now with Qatar Museums, Jean Nouvel, and Her Excellency. And it's the biggest installation I ever made, the most complex and difficult to build. And so I want to show you the process and how we start to think about this project with Jean Nouvel 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I did a big project in Versailles. It was also fountains, and but it was a really smaller scale. It was this project in Qatar is 5 times bigger than the one in Versailles.
Good idea.
And so I call this project Alpha, and it's based on this idea of the reeds you have in the desert, who are used by the people to make baskets or elements for the house, and those reeds have a reflections on water. So, as you may know, the museum of Jean Nouvel is built on a big lagoon, and I didn't want to fight with the building. My idea was to make something linked really to the architecture and to find a very subtle dialogue with this architecture. It's a big site. It's almost 1 kilometer long, and with a vision you can't have you can't have a full vision of the sculptures. So the reeds are also the elements the calligrapher used to make calligraphy. So they cut the reeds and they put the reeds in the inks and start to make calligraphy. And because of this museum is linked also to culture, our idea was to show how the writing and the power of letters are part of a culture. And because we were in a nomadic culture, the writing is something you can take with you and you can do everywhere. So I start to draw some forms, shapes, inspired by Arabic calligraphy, and when you look at them from the front, they look like abstract sculpture. But when you turn around the lagoon, they turn into letter. So the letter, for example, this closed tie is one of the letter I use because it's a letter with a very dynamic shape, and also it's a letter you can really turn into a sculpture and also into a fountain. So this is a series of letters you can, in the alphabet you can find in Arabic alphabet. And those are the first proposal I did for the sculpture of the lagoon. It was to have those abstract reeds facing the building. And when you turn around, they turn into letters like you can recognize. And those are the first simulation we did with Jean Nouvel about how to put those reeds all around the lagoon so they can also disappear and appear when you walk all around the lagoon. So this was the first idea, and this was 3 years ago. And we need time to build it. We need time to find the way to put them, and also the way to build them, because Qatar have a very strong climate, and it was not possible for me to use glass as I use usually. So I made them in a very strong stainless steel, cover with ceramics, and so it's one of the strongest elements we can use in outside sculptures. So those are different points, simulations points of view, and then the idea was to turn the sculpture into fontaines. So you see how my idea was also to link the shape of the jet to the shape of the architecture, to follow the shape of all the petals of the rose, and to have a sort of a double life of the same sculpture. So when it turned into fontaine, you miss the reflection in water. And those are the piece installed last month, where we were doing the first jet proof. And so it took 4 months to install in summer, in the heat of Qatar. So we were working every night, midnight to 5, and with 40 degrees. So it was a very strong physical experience also with the country. And last month we filled the lagoon with water, and we start to do the jets to be sure they will follow, as I thought, the shape of the architecture. So those images are the first images of this project. And when the water is not working, you have the reflection on water, like if the ink is falling down from the shapes. You can feel how big is the installation, because when you see all the sculpture, there is 114 sculptures. We had this huge challenge to build them in 1 year, so it was more than 150 people who work on this project for 1 year. And in terms of public art, I think it's one of the biggest I ever made, but it's also one of the biggest made in the world, because it's part of this very ambitious program Qatar have in terms of contemporary art. You can see how the public art collection is so important with so amazing artists. And those are when you will see the jet at night, because nobody saw those images before. And so it's turned into something really more theatrical and more also joyful, because my idea, my concept always is to bring joy to the public and to find a way to also let the people dream of another way to live. Thank you.
And now Liam Gillick.
Good afternoon. Just checking. It's a great honor to be here. I had the opportunity to be here 2 years ago and have a tour of the museum under construction, which was really something. And it's great to be back and at the time of the actual opening. What I want to do today, just quickly, is to explain my position in relation to the subject of that we're talking about today, about the relation between heritage, art, contemporary art, and so on, by showing you a few examples of projects leading up to what I did here. So here we see the Roman arena in Arles in France, one of the most extraordinary pieces of Roman architecture in the center of the city. And here we see a project that I worked on with Philippe Perreno, a French artist who's also coming for the opening here this week. And it was an exhibition in 2012 called To the Moon Via the Beach. And what we tried to do in this case was to activate the history, to take this monument and turn it into a kind of living organism in a way. So here you actually see the final stage of the project, which was a kind of lunar landscape in the center of the arena. But this was the result of a process. And it's a process that brought together people in the town, in the city, and also people from all over Europe, and in fact all over the world, to come and work together on something. And I think this is really an interesting way to deal with this question of heritage in relation to art, which is it has to be a kind of conversation, an activated conversation. And that was our idea, that somehow the project itself would be a process, that you would witness something transforming in front of your eyes. A little bit like the fountains, the way that they will activate the space, and you'll see this permanent transformation. We had a group of people initially making a beach, right, a kind of beachscape. So every day people could come to the arena to visit this historic monument, where the temperature, to be honest, is not so different from here sometimes, and watch this group of people who are kind of artists of sand producing this kind of beach, like a typical idea of the dunes and the beach. And over time, artists made interventions. So this is the work of a young French artist producing these umbrellas made from the kind of silver blankets that you use to help people survive, right, in the cold. So you could sit there and you could spend time, you could relax, you could waste time in a way, and you could watch in a distracted manner this kind of work going on. And what was happening over the 3 days was the beach was transforming into the moon. And you could see this slow mutation of form, and at the same time, these kind of gestures and moments, including, and I think this is something that this city is really good at, moments of kind of light and experience, like that feeling of that I get when I come here, when you leave the hotel or you walk down the street and you suddenly see a building or a view or a group of people in the distance, that feeling of an experience. So for example, this looks like a full arena, but in fact, it's a special event by a French artist called Dominique Gonzalez Foerster, a kind of fragment of an opera performed for a fragment of an audience. So the point is to play with what you've got, but to take care of what you've got at the same time, to do something where you're careful not to damage or disrespect, in a way, the history, but you kind of reactivate it. You bring in new characters, new people. This is a work by an artist from Thailand who had deployed an astronaut. Every now and then an astronaut would appear playing a very melancholic tune on a harmonica and wander through the beach, kind of trying to create what Philippe Perreno calls like a film in real time. You see the beach again. Now I want to talk about a different function of public art that I've been involved in, which is to do with communication and education to people who are outside. not just for the people in the city, but the people who are the foreigners, the people from other places. Images and ideas that will be distributed around the world and get seen and make people think. So this is a work from Istanbul that I made in 2015. And as you can see, it's an algorithm. It's a mathematical equation, and it faces back across the Bosphorus and can be best seen from a distance, from that amazing place where, in a way, you could say east meets west or west meets east. If you want to be that simple, it's at least one symbolic moment. And this is an artwork which is intended to be appreciated for its beauty. Mathematics is beautiful. Mathematics begins in the Arab world. It is something we have all then taken and used and exchanged. And this is an equation about pressure and flow. And it's intended, really it works best as an image, in a sense. The only way it can be seen is from a distance, maybe from a ship, maybe from across the water. And this image was distributed quite widely at the time. And it's an example of working with the industrial buildings, some of which we have here, dating from the 60s and so on, and trying to reuse them temporarily to send not a message, but maybe a question, right? Or to make people think. And the main question people asked was, what does this mean? What is this saying? What I found very nice, the people who didn't ask this question were the engineers and the sailors and the people involved in international trade who understand mathematics. So for the art people, this was difficult. For the engineers, this was something quite different. So now we come to another thing that's important for me, which is the idea of public art and heritage in relation to the public space, the meeting space. And one thing that's very striking when you first visit Doha is the sense, especially around the Corniche and the various parks, of this multiple places for meeting and for existing side by side. This is a classic European example, the Museum Plaza in Amsterdam. And it's a crossing point, surrounded by historic buildings. It's a moment which I think is very important for public art, is to make temporary use of these crossing points, these places of meeting, right? So this is a work not intended to be there forever, just there for a few months, but to be encountered by people who are crossing in different directions and heading to work maybe, going shopping, going to the museums, and they encounter something very intuitive and direct. In this case, works from the graphic collection of the museum in Amsterdam, redeployed as something that you can encounter and play with and create a memory with. This got me thinking about this possibility, and you see it already here in the parks, of a kind of interactivity. And this idea that heritage is not just about buildings and objects. Public art is not just about abstract sculptures. Heritage is also the way people, in a way, distract each other together. You see it a lot with the way people play here with kids. They play, there's football everywhere, more and more. But also this general sense of a kind of playfulness, which I find very inspiring. So this is in Japan 3 years ago, which maybe is not so spontaneous sometimes. And they also have a different sense of heritage, but it's maybe not so different, because most of the city of Okayama in the south of Japan was actually built since 1950, right? It's all new. They have historic buildings, but they're generally recreated because the city was completely destroyed. And I wanted to look again at this sense of the legacy of modernism. This is where I'm coming to here, of modernity. And here we have buildings, some buildings like this building, for example, the fire station, which for me is a very important type of architecture. It's a kind of heritage that can easily be dismissed or taken away. But there's some extremely fine modern, late modern buildings here. And I can see that they're being taken care of and being reused. I think it's extremely important to do this. And I did the same thing here. The work is installed on a basketball court of an abandoned school from the 1960s. So you're basically finding ways to reuse a kind of lost zone, right, where you don't know what to do. And when you do not want to live in a living museum. It's not good, in a sense. You want to have this combination of heritage, public art, and a very strong sense of the present. For me, what's interesting as an artist sometimes is to find the spaces in between. This is what you can do here, is find these zones in between the history, the modernity, and the recent past, and occupy them temporarily, create new diversions. It seemed to work here. So, just to come to the end, or come to the present, is my work for the park. It's really exciting to be able to communicate with the Museum of Islamic Art and the Qatar Museum and see, in a way, backstage, to get to see some of the collection. And this is something I was able to do. And you don't need to say anything about an image like this. The beauty, the combination of science and art, which is the thing that affects me so much, the sort of functional beauty, meaning it has a function, but it also has an inherent beauty and truth about it. Again, the fact that the museum, we're talking about massive distances, different cultures that have, in a way, shared moments, but very radically different. So I was very excited about all these things, and I started to produce, this is how I work. It's a bit sad compared to my colleague here with his beautiful drawings, but I'm a victim of the computer. So this is how I draw. I start to play with the images and to try and bring them into a form that can then be built by my studio in Berlin. And you see how exciting the studio is. This is the inside of the sculpture. And there's Thomas. This is a photo that Thomas sent me to prove that he was working, which is very nice. Here you see the work just about to leave to come here. And here we see one of the works being installed in the park. So what do we have here? We start with what we think of as, what I thought of as, heritage, public art, these questions. In fact, this work has tiaras on it, which are actually made in England and in Austria, but with pearls from here, right? Being then reused on the surface of an object, which the minute we install it, children run to it. They don't ask, is it art? They don't ask, am I learning anything? They don't ask, okay, some of them turn to their parents and do this, and then they run to it again, and people start to use it. So, see a closer view. And here we see one of my favorite times as the sun starts to go down. You see another image here from one of the horoscope drawings, and again, an extraordinary pearl necklace. And the works end up being sculptures in the park with windows to look across to the other side, to the new, amazing modern buildings. At the same time, the kids use them, stick their heads in them, and, of course, kick footballs at them. Which I didn't think about that. But here you see, there's a snapshot of a park being used and people, it's adding to something. It's the idea of public art as an addition and as a supplement and as a kind of everyday encounter. This is something where you're kind of playing a game and shifting the focus between history and the present and history and the present. So just two more quick photos to make my point a bit stronger, which is a different point, a fourth, fifth point, which is a work I made in upstate New York, which means by Canada, in 2005. And it's a kind of encouragement to my colleague here, or the person who really made everything possible, along with Tom and the other team, to continue the project of not being scared, right? Once we start talking about these questions, it's easy to think we've got to be responsible, we've always got to be so careful, and the projects here have been fearless. And, look at this. I put this abstraction right next to a historic building permanently, in between the modern and the old. And the art can sit there as a kind of in between the two. And again here, in a beautiful Italianate garden in Texas, believe it or not, where again you're really confronting this historical building with a new structure. And I think that's what I have to say, which is there's nothing to be frightened of. I come from a culture in Britain where people are very frightened of new things often. And I think that continuing the kind of fearless project, but feeding in, keeping on moving, keep fluidity, this is the way. And I'd like to thank you for listening to me, and thank you for the invitation.
Now please welcome Suzanne Gupta.
Thank you very much. It's very inspiring to follow such great art and continue that conversation. I am Chudprata Segupta from the Raqs Media Collective. I ran into this panel because we're still doing some stuff at the Mataff, Arab Museum of Modern Art, where we have an exhibition, so please do go and see it. It's called Still More Worlds, and that's partly something that I will talk about, because my understanding of publicness or public art has to do with the telling of stories. A public forms when people tell each other secrets, or when they share dreams, or fragments of a nightmare, or tell stories repeatedly. I spent a wonderful morning today at the Qatar National Library watching this public form. It was an incredible experience for me to see so many people across different ages be with books, be with knowledge, be with stories, and gradually you can sense that feeling of something emerging, something that will actually be the greatest heritage for the future. So for me, the question of heritage is not just what we inherit from the past, but also what we leave for the future. It's a bit of time travel. And time travel is what I'm going to try and do with you briefly today. Let me begin with this park. It's called Coronation Park. It's a procession of interrupted and broken statues. In Delhi, the city that I live in and come from, at the edge of the city, there is a derelict graveyard of imperial statuary called Coronation Park. As a kid growing up, I used to go there with my friends playing hooky from school and look at these statues of dead emperors and viceroys and imagine the fact that power itself was a relic, and the relicness of power was what interested me. We told each other stories. We made up stories about these powerful but now dead men. I think about the statues that my country, the Republic, puts up, and I know that one day they too will be statues of dead men, and people, the public, will continue telling stories about the fragility of power. So these were installed at the Venice Biennale a few years ago. And what I really found enjoyable was that a lot of people thought they had always been there. So somebody told me when they were looking for our work, and I said, "You're actually sitting on the work." And she said to me, "No, I've been to Venice so many times, and this sculpture's always been here." And I thought that was, that's not bad. So the work has infected the past as much as the present. So that business of whispering into, let's say, a park is something that interests our practice. This is from a commission at the Lomia Sculpture Park in St. Louis, Missouri, which some of you might know is the site of the Ferguson shootings in the United States. It's where this incredible amount of awareness of the violence that the police was effecting upon young African Americans was produced. And we were asked to produce sculptures for a forest. And we said that let's look at different histories of this place. Let's look at the fact that St. Louis was a place for the World's Fair. It's one of those international expositions in the late 19th, early 20th century. So the world was there. And also it's a place where there's a graphic understanding of what the violences and inequalities of our times are. So we sent out a series of postcards to the community with a simple question: if the world was a fair place, then? And that process produced a lot of answers, about 1,000 answers, from which we selected, let's say, 160 responses describing what fairness or justice could mean in a fractured community like St. Louis. And those then became the bracelets or embraces for trees in the park, and they'll stay there forever, so that people, when they walk in this forest, can recollect the fact that if the world was a fair place, then free ice cream would be available for everybody. That was one of the responses. Or my grandmother would wake up happy was another response. Or that the police will protect us and not kill us was another response. There were interesting set of responses that became then whispers in a forest. There will be willingness to talk about the passage of the years. This is one. Another little experiment with plants. We read very carefully a workers' newspaper that is produced in the outskirts of our city. And in the New Year issue of this newspaper, once somebody had written, there will come a time when we will plant orchards, fruit orchards in factories. And this simple desire to convert the industrial heritage into a place of beauty and leisure on the part of somebody who works very hard in an industrial location was for us a provocation to think about what to do when invited to work in factories, which often end up being the sites of contemporary art production. So we decided to plant an orange orchard. And what's really remarkable about this work is that it's actually all about smell and light. When you walk into this factory, what greets you is the smell of citrus. And if you think of reanimating the spirit of an abandoned factory, which has often got a kind of melancholic, sad disposition, then the smell of oranges changes everything. So it was a way of reading a newspaper and turning a factory into something else. The other thing that I think constitutes a language, constitutes a public, is the whisper of language. And Arabic is a language foreign to me, but consistently present in my subconscious, because the place where I come from, Delhi, is a city full of the shadow and the lingering presence of the beauty of the Arabic language. It's on our buildings, it's in the words in our speech, it's in the dreams that we have. All the words for love in Hindustani, which is my language, come from Arabic. It's as if we didn't know how to say we love each other before the Arabic language came to us. So Arabic for us is a kind of presence of another time and another spirit. And we began thinking a lot about, for instance, carpets, everyday objects as placeholders for stories. This was a work that was made initially as a carpet and as a performance. So it's a carpet that you sit on, which uses the sign of infinity, which is something that we work with a lot, the horizontal, it's called the lemniscate, and you see the infinity working itself into the carpet, but it becomes a reason for two people to have a conversation, which is both a very old one as well as a very new one. And it's a conversation between Ibn Sina and al-Biruni. If you went to the Qatar National Library today, you could see the books of Ibn Sina and al-Biruni. And these two men, sometime in the early medieval period, actually had a correspondence with each other. They were separated by 300 miles somewhere in Central Asia, but they sent each other letters by pigeon post. And the correspondence between Ibn Sina and al-Biruni, who were both in their early 20s at the time, sort of like an internet blog correspondence of the day, is about everything. It's about the origins of the universe, it's about the nature of God, it's about the structure of water, it's about the science of memory. It's as if these two young men decided that we, who have the time, will talk about everything. We revisited that conversation and rewrote it as if we were speaking to each other today. And it exists in 3 languages, in Arabic, Urdu, and in English. And we have performers doing it, and we do the English and the Urdu ourselves, which is the languages that we can speak. So this carpet, wherever it moves, right now, for instance, it's in the collection of the National Gallery of Canada, becomes a place to have this conversation again and again. Finally, we come to aspects of our show in the Mataff. And it works with many things. It works with light, it works with memory, it works with archives, it works with forms of life. Here, for instance, is an animation of a video that takes a public document, a fingerprint or a handprint, which was used to authenticate documents, and is the ancestor of the biometric technologies that we use today. So whenever you're passing through immigration, you're putting your fingerprints. This image, it's a handprint taken in 1858 in India, is the ancestor of all those processes. And we animate that and make it into a creature, make it into a living thing. Or, for instance, we come to carpets again. And this is an installation of huge carpets that extend right up to the ceiling, about 13 meters. And it's inspired by the fact that the cities of the Middle East and North Africa became spaces for new forms of gathering, which we now call the Arab Spring. And here, in this part of the world, this form of being with each other and asking each other questions about history, the future, and time was for us a really beautiful thing to reflect on and to make these carpets that gathered people in the form of pixels, because that is what they are. Here, the pixel becomes a unit of the crowd, of accumulation. So this may not be a public work of art, but it's a work of art with a public in it, in a way. Let me finally come to a work that we've made especially for this exhibition, and which will, part of which will stay here. It's called Dohas for Doha. In our language, a Doha is a rhyming quatrain. It's a form of poetic speech, often used to encapsulate a proverb or a pithy, ironic, beautiful text of wisdom. And when we were coming to Doha, we said we must make Dohas for Doha. It's also a blessing, it's a warning, it's a sign. And so these are video carpets, if you like. And the video carpets have different different sort of aspects. Here, maybe it doesn't play. Anyway, but you can go and see it because it's right here in Burj Doha. There is a Doha on this tower, running text, and Doha always includes the author's name. So we are Raqs. This is a Doha that says, Raqs waits for times to ripen. Let today's loads tomorrow lighten. So it's an invocation to the future. It's a piece of illumination. It's public as a huge building can be, and it's waiting for everyone to light up the night. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you all of you. When I want to open up, I'm going to have a little discussion and then open it up to you all for questions. I think kind of what strikes you immediately from the three artists here is this kind of extraordinary response to being invited to Doha to make a public work, and three kind of quite extraordinarily different, all three inspiring works on very different kinds of scales with very different kinds of intentions. So I just want to start with, I want to look a little bit, because these are international artists, or so-called international artists. In fact, all of them work around in very different locations. I want to start with Chudra because Raqs's methodology is very much research-based, and then I'll pass this over to Jean-Michel and Liam. What were the challenges in terms of undertaking research for a project in Doha, in Qatar? And I've had my own.
Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing for us to bear in mind was that this site, this place is so deeply, intricately linked to our own sense of where we come from. There have been ways in which people between the west coast of India and the east coast of the Arabian Peninsula have been talking to each other thousands of years. So when you try and imagine an intervention that you're going to make in a place like this, you have to understand that you're actually reaching into your own memory. So in some ways, you're in a completely different place. It's also the fact that when we are speaking to a public here, that public is a variegated one. A lot of the apparatus of our show, we decided to use a language, Malayalam, which I don't speak, but which the majority of South Asians living here, who are a very large number of the public, of the people who work on many things, speak. So for us, it was also a discovery of a fragment of our own consciousness displaced. So research meant thinking quite deeply about what it means to see yourself differently reflected in another place.
Right. And Jean-Michel, your work obviously uses Arabic calligraphy. What challenges did you find in terms of doing the research? And then I believe that the letters are situated in such a way that no specific word is ever written. Is that right? Or
yeah.
read?
No, what it was difficult for me, it was at the same time I had to have a dialogue with one of the most famous French architects. So I was in a very French connection, a big French connection. And I have also to make something who makes sense for this country, and also I had to discover the country, what I didn't know. I have just a sort of a romantic vision of Gulf Persic and all what's happened here in this region. So it was not easy for me to enter this this world. But what Qatar Museum did, they really helped me because they sent a calligrapher to my studio in Paris. We had a lot of conversation with a lot of people from the Qatar Museum who came to my studio in Paris. Mm-hmm. So I discovered the country through the young people of this country, in fact.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Liam, I can come to you. It's all been very positive. You know, people always say public art, very positive. The experience is remarkable, very uplifting. I'll tell you, it's normally a nightmare from my 20 years of experience of working in public art. And, you know, our jobs as al-Rahman is to make this inherently difficult and treacherous procedure from conception to realization as painless as possible. But maybe, Liam, you could say, you know, as an artist invited here to make a new work, what were the specific challenges you faced? Because we're in an audience of people who actually, in the future, are quite influential in terms of helping us realize works as well.
Yeah. I'm interested in it sounds technology, communication, and trust, which sounds like some terrible new sort of corporation, but which seems odd for an artist maybe. But once I realized that was possible, we're living in the present. We were emailing every 3 times a day, sending files, making use of the present to do this thing. Once I realized the museums trusted me enough to send me the images, they knew I would use them properly. Once I realized we have the technology, right, and the people here that we can join together with the people in Germany and in New York, then I'm okay. Mm-hmm. And then it's just work. It's like hard work. And yeah, it's a tricky one. They're not really challenges. For me, I got that feeling from your installation too of the fountains. It's like there's a point when you know that from now on it's just work, right? So it's not very exciting in some ways. It's not very creative, but it's the bit where you're doing the work. It's what I want to be positive. That's a positive challenge, right? Mm. I would say, that's a positive challenge. If anything, I'd say it's the bigger issue is the one of, the moment you've put the first element in place, right? Maybe the same for you, or the moment you hang the first work in the museum, because that's when you face a reality, like a concrete physical reality. It's all very well making nice presentations, talking about your ideas, but the physical reality of something is quite different. So I don't know if I'd call it whatever. What did you call it? Difficulty or something?
Challenges.
Challenge, yeah. I'd call it fear and trust or something. It's between the two.
Mm. One of the things, obviously, the QM has tried to do is have a number of artists spend residencies here of an extended period, which probably is not the case in your case. I was interested. I think both you, Liam, you mentioned the word invisibility, and I think you mentioned whispering in the park, and then Jean-Michel, you mentioned how the work kind of functions within the building but doesn't create a kind of fence in front of the building. I often thought of what I was doing in terms of public art was not presenting the lead actor to the play, but kind of the walk-on part. I wonder what role, let's start with you, Jean-Michel, what role you think artists play, well, the role of artwork within the physical and semantic architecture of the city. What kind of role they play?
I think it depends the city, it depends the country. It's totally different for me to make a piece in Versailles, talking with my own history and with centuries in a very historical place, than to do something in a country like Qatar when everything is new. So it's very moving for an artist to be part of this new story of a country, to be the old one you will see in 100 years, mm-hmm. and to be the one who build the country and to build in a such ambitious project. Mm-hmm. Because for an artist, doing an art piece outside, it's your own choice. It's because you want to do something outside. You want to go to the public. You want to go in the street, mm-hmm. to face the public. And also in a city like this, you are building the memories. So that's very exciting for that. And making something more subtle is also important for me. I don't want to build a monument in terms of a dated monument of a period. I want people follow the generations. Some people will be born with this piece and discover it in 20 years and talk about it like if it's part of their own history, what is really interesting.
It's interesting because when I was asked to do this public art and heritage panel, I thought, oh gosh, and we were talking about old buildings and bricks and things, archaeological sites, how are we going to do this, And thinking about heritage sort of reflects a little bit what Jean-Michel just said, which is, you know, heritage is not what we inherit, but what we, and something that al-Rahman said, something we give to the future, you know? So there's the question for you. What are we giving to the future with, for example, these three artists, do you think?
Well, this work. I guess what we're giving to the future is a new understanding of what art is, an opportunity for dialogue between different ideas between people. When, for example, what Liam showed, the slide before last, this reminds me of the thumb that says by Cesar at Suwagov. So you have a context which is traditional, part of our heritage, and you present this contemporary piece of art in the middle. The reaction of people was split, I would say. Some people liked it, some didn't understand it, some just did this in front of it. But the thing that we want is to create this dialogue. So people are asking about it. Now they learned about the artist. They understood the context behind, the narrative behind why it was placed there. And it created a dialogue. So we're hoping that in the future this continues and people will be more courageous, I guess, and more accepting for artwork. Yeah.
And how did you know, so you have these very distinct periods of public art installation here, which have already created, in a sense, a little mini history, a little heritage unto itself, from the Richard Serra East-West sculpture, which is in perfect condition this week, to Damien Hirst's Miraculous Journey, which is an astonishing sculpture, would be an astonishing sculpture in any part of the world, to this current and sort of, in a sense, new generation of projects that are currently coming through, which are both sometimes historical work, as says our thumb, to new works like Jean-Michel or Liam. You know, what's your impression of how public art will evolve over the next 5 years, I say?
Well, I would say within the next 5 years, we would focus on less monumental and less monumental artwork. Of course, that will not stop. We'll continue with the monumental stuff. But we will engage more of the smaller scale, more connected to the people, because that's the main goal, is to connect with the people, have some kind of relation with the people on a smaller scale, because not everybody is going to go to Richard Serra. People do go there. And maybe not everybody appreciates the smaller art pieces. We want to create opportunities throughout Doha for what we call a deep impact, kind of between these sikkas and corridors where art can flourish. So instead of just having the big monumental ones around Doha.
Liam, you're known as like one of the most significant critical thinkers in the art world today. How do you think public art can be progressively critical?
I think, you know, you have to be very conscious of a couple of things, right? One of the things I've been thinking about a lot while I've been here is in a way, a kind of philosophical issue, right? If you grow up in a big city in Europe like London, you always grow up thinking, what if you could do what you really want to do? What if you had a kind of a new beginning and you could start again? What would you do? Would you do the right thing? And it's a kind of thought. And I'm staying in a hotel, which everyone will know, which produced a famous photograph of just a form, as if almost alone on the sand, the Sheraton Hotel, from a time I remember, 1982, right? And you can imagine around that, you have that possibility to do things, to do something new. What I'm saying about that is not that, you see, I don't think it creates certainty sometimes. I think what you've got to do is preserve uncertainty a little bit with these things. That's one thing. It's like creating space for people to remain uncertain. Because when you have such possibilities, right? It's easy just to make, to forget about this, I don't know what it is, a kind of uncertainty, to kind of, like you were saying about starting to integrate things more maybe is a good thing. I think that's got its own history, its own philosophy, its own scholarship, and that's something to maybe accentuate. I also think this question of affecting the people who are doing the work. I've been here now not very long, but I already had to change a lot of ideas. And I'm not sure quite how or what's happening, but something happens. I've been writing more than I normally do, thinking in a different way, and it's this is really crucial, to bring people here to change them and then put them back out, send them back out in the world. And the third thing is this question of the gift. And this is something that is also problematic philosophically, the idea of the gift or the present, like what does that do? And the idea of a public artwork as a kind of a gift or a present, in a way, is a very, very delicate idea. And I think that this is another aspect to think about. So I'm not being very forceful in my response, but these are the things that I'm most affected by. Affecting the artists, changing the artists who come here, the idea of the gift and the idea of uncertainty. And these are very, this is where you get poetry in the end. This is what will produce things. This will produce poetry. It'll produce new ideas, and it'll give also a kind of a zone of thought, like a place where you can come and think. I think that's really something.
Maybe this, before we come out to the audience, the last question, which follows a little bit upon Liam. You know, I found, certainly in my career working in public projects, you often come back to the same question: what's the value of this? You know, I was once on Fox News, if you can believe it, where the guy said, "Well, how much did this sculpture cost?" And I said, "Well, how much did your bathroom cost?" And of course, his bathroom cost more than our sculpture. We once gilded the steps of the Williamsburg Bridge with 22-karat gold. It cost us $7,000, and we came under huge criticism of wasting money. And so I challenged the city to paint it grey for $7,000. But of course, they couldn't do. I'd like to ask Shudder, because Shudder has a very poetic vision. You know, how do you justify public art, and how do you talk to the value of public art?
Well, I think it's very exciting to think about that question here, because I've been going up and down from the center of the city to Mataff, and the thing that I keep thinking about is that there is this massive public transport infrastructure that's being produced, or there are these stadiums, or there's Education City. In a few years' time, the fact of a lot of people being together, moving from place to place, will become a commonplace reality in Doha. That atomized way of being inside a car will give way to being with other people. This is how publics are formed. Publics are formed when people feel comfortable in the presence of strangers. When you have something like Education City, this remarkable concentration of people in higher forms of education, thinking in one place. So in 1 square mile, you will have so many people researching, thinking, reading, reflecting. That's quite unprecedented in urban space in most parts of the world. So this is a public that is gradually going to emerge in the future. This is coming into being. I think as artists, and I'm responding to something that Liam said, which is very interesting. As artists, one of our jobs is to give people the tools with which to become who they will become. We step back. He offers a fold-out on the grass where people can become themselves. They can take an image of themselves. They can become the public of the future. In a text that we once wrote, we invoked Don Quixote speaking to his assistant, Sancho Panza, asking him to deliver a love letter to the woman he was in love with, and she asked him, "What's the address?" He said, "I don't know. She will come." Right? I think my relationship and our practice's relationship to the public is that unless we desire the public, it never appears. What is it in our work that creates that condition of desire, that makes people want to become a new kind of people? When I went to the library today, I could see the emergence of a new people. And for me, that's what public art is. Does it create that condition? Does it leave that door open? Does it leave a possibility for people to script themselves into the future?
Wonderful. So that, a very, very good answer. So we're going to open it up to questions from the audience, if there are. Yes, the lady here.
Yes. Dalal Harf. My question actually about the public art categories. Now we understand that the sculpture and photos, graffiti, and also music can be considered as a public art. But what about the smell? Gupta maybe show us this lemon garden, and he talked about the smell. I understand that we can take photos for sculpture, and also we can record the music. For even this social media, we can record them. But how we can make this and the smell? How can we transfer it, or how we can explain it to others or talk about it?
I think the whole territory we're talking about, when we're talking about the public art ideas, it's fairly new. It's not, we're not talking about, quite recently you go back to very straightforward, ordinary, traditional statues and so on, not so long ago in human history. The field we're talking about is still quite new, and I don't know how it's going to go. And there are so many possibilities right here for using the senses rather than the physical object, but the feeling, affecting the feeling. So.
If I take a walk in the souk, there is a quarter where the spice market and the spice smells become really powerful. I can imagine that people can create pathways, walking stations, which are, let's say you've got RFID points that connect smells to other experiences. And I think to create a kind of synesthetic situation where smell is the trigger for a sound or a story, it is possible. I think if you ask these questions, like you are creating a desire, artists can respond in a way that actually addresses the multiplicity of the senses.
Rumi said, wherever you stand, be the soul of that place. For all the artists on the panel, what is your source of inspiration from the Qatari culture? As an outsider, if you have the opportunity to create something new or have the opportunity to be commissioned for another work, would you please list like 3 main inspirations from the Qatari culture in particular?
Jean-Michel?
I did not unveil yet the project, so so it will be unveiled in 2 days. No, I think it's difficult for me to think about another project because I'm almost finished this project. So you can imagine working 5 years on a project. That's a typical question critic ask you. What is your next project? So let me enjoy this one first.
But maybe the question was
slightly different. It was about, is there something that inspires you, right? The first inspiration in Qatar, what would that have? Sorry to take off your job.
Yeah.
Like, what would have been the first? Maybe something striking.
I think it's the interacting with the public we don't know. It's a new public, as we say. It's a public really attentive in a way, because people are very curious about what will happen. So we have I think as artists we have a lot of chance to do something here in Qatar because the public is very curious. They have time to look at it. You know, when you go to museums, there is always people in museums here all days, because the museums are free and people can enter and just enjoy the collection. So I think with contemporary art in the city, it will be the same thing. it will be the response with this new public what we don't know, and I think maybe Qatar itself don't know what will be this public.
I mean, one of the things that's kind of, I found really fascinating in this period of coming here, I mean, these are international artists, I was going to ask this question anyway. I'm a quote-unquote international curator. But actually, you go through a period almost of cultural shock, not because you're seeing another culture, because you're looking at your own culture and realizing how little you actually know. And, you know, sort of in the last couple of years, talking to people about what we're doing here, then you get back and you realize how ignorant everybody else is too. So you have to go, you know, you go through a sort of period of absorption and trying to learn. And there are many, many things you take away. I wonder if I could ask the panel, let's just throw it the other way, what kind of some of the prejudices that have been kind of broken down while you've been involved in public projects here?
I guess my question was the sources of inspiration from the Qatari culture.
Exactly. I think you can look. I'll say what my
Qatar Airways, I would say, is probably one.
Qatar, yeah, why not? Hey, look, definitely the contemporary, the modern as well. I mean, we talk about heritage, but for me, definitely the legacy of modern buildings here, and this commitment to modern architecture, and big inspiration, and the shape, the form of the country itself, which it's kind of lucky. It's like if you come from Japan or you come from Britain, it's got a particular shape, like literally the shape. So it's like this idea of the mapping of this, the way that can be an inspiration. So it's a very distant view, like this, seeing it on a global way, and also this very particular history that's just because it's like almost like an accident of history, of this combination, this extremeness. I find that inspiring. That's very inspiring. It's not boring. See what I mean? So it gives you ideas. But what was your thing?
If I can respond very briefly. You can see different societies of different priorities, right? Right now, all across the world, one of the things that obsesses people in other societies is how to keep the world at a distance, how to make sure people don't come into your space. If you look at America, if you look at Europe, if you look at India, where I come from, the amount of energy and resources that are being put into place to make sure people don't come into your society is extraordinary. Here, on the other hand, you have a society that's very open to the world. It doesn't flex its power by means of military might. It doesn't try to throw money at other places in the world. It tries to build connections that are of ideas, of knowledge, and of culture. As far as I'm concerned, that is an understanding of the strength of the society. As an artist, it's very important for me to know, because I travel everywhere in the world, how societies treat foreigners, how societies treat the idea of the outsider. As long as this society remains open to the space and the presence of the outsider, it is going to be the future, not the past. For me, as an artist, this is an inspiration. This can change. Societies change. I hope you don't change this.
That is probably as good an ending to a talk as you can possibly get. So please join me in thanking al-Rahman, Liam, Jean-Michel, and Suzanne Gupta.